Thank you. Very grateful to be here. I think it's really, really, very humbling to see all of you here and sharing this space with me. Um, so I thought I'd take this time and this space to just share a few experiments in generosity that we've been trying. And really, this time is about a couple of pictures that I'm going to show you. That's me. A couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, doing what I did best. It's what I knew. That's what I dreamed about when I graduated from B school. And about 6 months ago, that's where I was. So, so I think this presentation is really about the shifts that happen when you move from that person on the left to the person on the right. And what happens, like what undergoes within you when you decide to make these choices. So about 2 years ago, my wife and I were in the routine life, chasing a few things when we said, there's something missing, there's some meaning that's missing. And we really wanted to figure out what it was. So we decided, you know what, the best way to find answers is to start serving. And we said, let's go out, let's serve with our hands, let's connect with our hearts, and let's open our minds. And we weren't sure what and how and where, so we actually traveled a lot. And after about 6 or 8 months, we found ourselves here in the Gandhi Ashram in Ahmedabad with a whole bunch of very, very inspiring people. That's us doing something in a slum in one of the Ahmedabad communities. But I really want to share this one story about this inspiring person on the left. That's Gopal Dada there. He's an 87-year-old gentleman. He's never taken a single medicine in his whole life. What you see there, that's half of his possessions. He possesses only 2 pairs of clothes, one little bag with his shoes and with other small material things. And really, he's one of the most happiest persons I've met. So one time, about 8 months ago, a few of us, there's 15 volunteers, gathered together. And we said, you know what, let's just go out for a walk by the Narmada. And along the way, experience generosity from our friends in the villages. And we were walking, and I remember this one particular day, we ended up walking about 25, 30 kilometers. And Gopal Dada, incidentally, was paired up with this 25-year-old girl called Maria from Stanford in California. And it was a long day, it was a long walk, and both of them were walking together. And along the way, she noticed that Gopal Dada, while speaking with her, would bend down, pick up a rock, and throw it to the side. And very naturally, like he was just doing this every few minutes, he'd bend down. There's this 87-year-old guy who's just walking, who can barely walk 25 kilometers, but he still bothers to bend down, pick up a rock, and throw it to the side. And Maria's from California, so she's thinking this is obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's very common back home. But interesting things are happening. Like, she's walking with him, and she's realized this guy is extremely aware. He's very, very in control of himself, his senses. He knows what's happening. And she realized this guy is one of the happiest people she's met. So slowly, out of respect, she starts bending down with him, picking up the rocks, and putting them to the side. And she doesn't know why she's doing it, but then around noon or lunchtime, she musters up the courage to say, Gopal Dada, why are you doing this? And Gopal Dada looks at her, smiles and says, there's so many people who'll be walking on this path behind us. I just want to prevent them from spraining an ankle, or I want to prevent a cyclist or motorcyclist from going over this rock and falling. And I heard this story, and that completely blew me. In my mind, I started doing an impact assessment. So Gopal Dada's walked about 60 years, about 5 kilometers a day. That's 100,000 kilometers, which means about 100,000 stones, which means that maybe he's saved 100 ankles, or maybe 10 motorcyclists, or 5 cyclists. But what is the cost of the transformation in a Maria who takes away the story? What is the cost of me who actually listens to the story? And what I realized about people like this was that they all believe that they have. So Gopal Dada was an 87-year-old guy, halfway, 1 foot in the grave, but he still believed that he had enough to offer to people he didn't even know. He didn't know who these passers-by would be. He didn't know if he'd ever see them. He didn't know if anyone would even benefit from something like this. It was also a way of life for him. It wasn't about this 9-to-5 job. It wasn't about going out and getting funding from XYZ grant, but it was just an effortless act of service. You're walking and you're picking up the stone and you're serving someone you may not even see. And it was really related to your inner transformation. You could see just how Gopal Dada was completely transformed by these acts of service of the last 87 years. And that's when things started changing for both me and my wife. We ended up volunteering at a space called the Seva Cafe. Now, I think some of you may have visited here in Bangalore or been heard about it online, but Seva Cafe is an experiment in generosity. It's a space where volunteers every day, they could be students, they could be housewives, they could be businessmen, they could be army officers. Anyone is free to walk in and say, I want to offer a meal, I want to cook, serve, clean up this meal for someone I don't know. And the guests are told, here, there's these volunteers who you don't know have cooked this meal for you. This meal that you're being offered is a gift from them. You can choose to continue this chain of generosity. So it's actually up to them to continue paying forward this gift to people they may not even see. So if they actually pay, this chain of generosity continues. And if they don't, the restaurant shuts down. So in a sense, it's a little circle of generosity which is going around. And it's free to fail if the guests drop out, the volunteers drop out. And interestingly, about a year ago, I was asked to look after the coordination of the entire space. And of course, my IIM mind goes to work, and this is what I come up with. So it's an Excel file, and I say, let's calculate the variable cost, the fixed cost, the break even. And I had like this little number in my head, and I said, you know what? We need to break even with every guest so that we can prove that something like this exists. I was on a mission. This was it. Like, I really wanted to prove that there is generosity in the world, and I started out with this mindset. But interesting things started happening. Very, very subtly, I didn't even realize it. I started thinking, what if I put posters about Seva Cafe in the very affluent areas of Ahmedabad? What if I say, let's try and attract some of the richer people because they're going to pay more than this break-even amount? When everyone started walking into the restaurant, I started labeling them. If an NRI or a foreigner walked in, I was like, that guy is worth 1,000 rupees. If I spend time with him, I'm going to talk to him, and he's going to pay a couple thousand rupees for this. But that guy's a rickshaw driver, he's just 40 or 50 rupees. And that's when my wife stepped in and she said, Siddharth, you have to stop thinking like this. So we decided to take a little jump. And we said, what if we can just trust whoever walks in and serve whoever walks in, making this assumption that there is a goodness in everyone? Like, what if? Like, what happens? Will we shut down? Like, will things go crazy? Will people come and utilize us and use us and we'll be left fools? We said, let's try it for a couple of weeks. And that's when the first shift happened. This shift from transaction to trust. So in basic economics, you're taught that there has to be a transaction between people for prices to exist. But what if, like I said, you trusted? So interestingly, a couple of weeks into this, this experiment of trusting, in walked the chaiwala from across the street. And he comes there with his wife and his 7-year-old son, and they're all sitting there. And immediately my mind said, that's 50 rupees. And that's 60 rupees. But then I said, no, I have to serve them. So I actually sat down with them for about 10 minutes, explaining the concept to them. And I realized this was the first time for them on a table and a fork and table mats. And I said, wow, I mean, that's just a great opportunity for me to be able to serve. And so after 10 minutes, I walked away to talk to some of the other guests and volunteers. And then someone taps me on the shoulder. And I turn around, and it's this 7-year-old son. And he comes to me, and he's got like this big pile of table mats and plates and forks. And I'm confused. What I realized is he'd gotten up. He'd gone around to some of these tables around him because he'd observed some of the educated volunteers. And he decided to pick up these plates and spoons and forks and offer it as a form of service. Now, no one told him to do this. I don't know if he's going to be a better husband or a better son or a better father because of this. But something told me that that day, that chaiwala may have paid 100 rupees. But that was as valuable as someone else paying 2,000 rupees. So price and value are actually not linked. Value is something that's so subjective. And it was our duty to just go out and serve unconditionally. The second shift that started happening was consumption to contribution. So because volunteers would come in without any incentive, no one was given any financial incentives, or no one was given a certificate or a resume point or able to put it on their CV, volunteers were just serving there out of complete offering. what started happening is it started rippling out into the guests. So guests started getting moved as well. We had one guest who went back to Baroda and said, you know what, I make mukhwas at home, I want to start offering. So she sent us 2 boxes of mukhwas for all the guests at Seva Cafe. In the Seva Cafe in Mumbai, on the first day, we had one guest from Pune who came all the way just for the meal, and he comes and he says, here's 5 kilos of atta. I don't want to offer you guys money, but I want to offer you guys atta so that the next Seva Cafe you can cook with this. And I'm looking at this, and again my mind says, wow, like what is the price of this? What is the price of someone carrying these heavy bags from Pune just to offer? And what happens when we actually make that shift? So in economics, you're taught that everyone consumes, that man is made to consume and his happiness is linked to consumption. But what if you actually assume that, can we actually create a space built only on contribution? We didn't know, but we were willing to try. The third shift was about scarcity to abundance. So again, economics will tell you, if for any economic good to have a price, there has to be scarcity of resources. So if you go to the beach and you pick up seashells and sand and you go to people and say, here, I want to sell you sand and seashells, no one's going to buy it, right? Because there's abundance of sand. And so if you take that sand to Delhi and try to offer it, there will be a price for it all of a sudden. So what if we actually came from that space of abundance? As opposed to saying there's limited food, you say, I'm not going to refuse anyone. If someone wants 5 more sandwiches, you offer 5 more sandwiches. If someone wants more chaat, you offer them more chaat. If someone wants water, you offer them water. What happens? So your natural assumption is that you'll run out. But crazy things started happening. One time we had only 2 volunteers showing up. And so we looked at each other and we were wondering what to do. There's only 2 volunteers. Should we close the cafe? So we said, no, let's just experiment and share with the guests. We decided to do a silent night that day. And so volunteers weren't talking, the kitchen was silent, the guests weren't speaking. And our efficiency was unbelievable because from across the hall, I could talk to people just by eye contact. So we realized we'd unlocked this whole social capital just because we came from this space of abundance. That night, a couple who were guests got up and started making chaat for other guests. And if you think about it, this couple came to a restaurant, paid as much as another restaurant, made food for the others, and actually left feeling happy. So how do you explain that? How do you explain this unlocking of capital that we otherwise would not even have thought existed? So that made my mind really think. You listen to Gandhi's quote, which says, the world has enough for every man's needs, but not for every man's greed. So what if that is actually true? What if there is an abundance? What if there is enough for all of us? I'm sure it's too idealistic to think it can work on a macro level, but what if we actually just create circles? Like this is something we're all comfortable with and we know about. But what happens when we make these 3 shifts to trust, contribution, and abundance? What happens? Like, is it completely crazy, or can we actually create circles or little spaces which remind us of these circles of trust in the larger world? So this is what slowly started emerging. It was just, it started rippling out into spaces, projects. Someone said, I want to host generously from my home. So people actually leave their door open from 7 to 8 in the evenings. Anyone is free to come and sit in silence. And across 5 cities, these host families actually serve who was willing to walk in. A few people got together and said, let's make beautiful things as an offering, out of, as a form of art. When you see things that are so beautifully made, it's tough to put a price tag on them. But what happens if you just offer it and say, I trust the buyer to value this? Can we actually create circles like that? Can we actually have Seva cafes in a few more cities? Can we have gatherings or retreats which are held once a month in this spirit? We weren't sure, but we said, let's just experiment and try and let's see what's emerging. And it keeps emerging. Like a rickshaw driver in Ahmedabad for the last year and a half decides to run his rickshaw in this spirit. So he actually tells the people in the rickshaw, here's an envelope. I trust that you'll decide how much to pay. Raghu says, I don't even have money. I don't even have 2 legs. That guy over there, he's got polio in both his legs. But he says, I want to serve 14 women in the slums in this spirit, just on the basis of gift economy. So it's not even sometimes related to material wealth or physical wealth, but can we allow it to keep rippling out? What happens? We don't know, but I think we like to see how things emerge. And the true impact of this, we can't really assess either. I'm just like to end with a little story of a friend called Swapna. So Swapna is a regular manager in an HR organization. Um, she was a volunteer with the first Seva Cafe in Mumbai. And Swapna, as part of the volunteering, had to go out in the morning and pick out a few utensils for the cafe to run. So she went by with another volunteer in a car, and they go over and park their car outside a particular gate. And as they park and get out, they had to make a quick 30-second stop to pick up all the stuff. The watchman of the building comes yelling, and he's like, he's hurling abuses at them and really, really agitated. He probably had a bad day, but he's really, really shaken. And both Swapna and this volunteer are really shaken too. I mean, they almost feel violated. And they're thinking, let's just get out of here in 30 seconds or a minute and move out. So they actually do their work and move out and just go away from the space. Back in Seva Cafe, she's feeling agitated all day. So once Seva Cafe ends, she goes over to her friend, to her home, and just outside the door, she stops, walks down again, catches a cab back to the space where she met the watchman. She goes over to the watchman and says, Bhaiya, I'm sorry about what we did. You must have had a bad day, but I'd just like to apologize. And I just want to tell you to try and control your anger in the future. And she actually offers him a little piece of chocolate. And she comes back and she writes us this mail. I would not have done this normally, but there seems to be a shift. I don't know if it's temporary or permanent, but I want to explore it further. So what I'm trying to say is that very often when we create circles like this, the true impact of these shifts can't really be calculated, but sometimes you have to just trust that these ripples are going out. And in some way, they're creating impact to some watchman or some HR manager or some teacher or student. We just have to trust that. So thank you for listening, and very grateful to be here.